welcome to Dr. Shay Ed. My name is Dr. Shawana Chambers, also known as Dr. Shay. This is the second video in my COVID-19 and K-12 education series. Today I want to talk a little bit about access and equity, really more so my reflections on what I've learned, what I've observed, and then what I've read about over the course of the last few months, and what that might look like for us moving forward. So there are three big pieces of the access and equity issue that I want to talk about. For me, COVID-19 made the gaps magnify. I don't mean that it's a small possibility that there will be some magnification of these, the technology gap, the wealth gap, and the learning gap. I mean that it happened and it's continuing to happen. And I don't know when that ends. And I don't know where we'll be once it's finally, finished. When I think about the technology divide, the biggest thing I think is, most districts did not have that one-to-one device opportunity for students. It's really expensive. And so when the school shut down, everyone across the country was trying to figure out, how do we make sure that there's a device in every child's hand really quickly so that they can be prepared for this online learning, right? So we already knew these gaps existed. We've been talking about these gaps for forever. But it wasn't until COVID-19 that I think a lot of people actually could not pretend it didn't exist anymore. And so, districts are scrambling, trying to figure out, how do we make sure that there's a device in every child's hand? And a lot of districts ended up doing paper packets for the first couple of weeks until they got their plan together and were able to disseminate all of those devices to different students. But some districts never got to that point. And so there are some districts that did paper packets the entire time, or some schools that did paper packets the entire time that we were closed. But with that, for districts that had made it and figured out how they were going to do it, great. You think you've reached a good place, and then you think about the next barrier or the next obstacle, which was reliable internet connection, right? And so, were districts able to give hotspots to everyone? No. And so we go through this here's another tech divide. Now we've got kids with devices, but they don't have a way to connect it to the internet. And, you have internet service providers that are offering, free service up until this month and this time, which was great, except everyone didn't qualify for that. And so what do you do with the students who needed a device, got the device, needed internet, couldn't get that? All right, you end up giving them paper packets as well. Meanwhile, students who had dedicated devices in their homes, students who have fiber optic and all of these different things, they don't have to worry about that. They're well into their online programming. They're doing the things they need to do, and they're moving forward. But you have this stall for all of our vulnerable students who didn't have those things already in the home. And so that's something that, even as we were able to, or across the country, we were able to get to the end of the school year, we have to think about, what is your plan going forward? What happens if we can't get into classrooms in August and September? What happens if you have to do half days, or you have to do 2 days on, 3 days at home? What happens when you can't be back in the classroom on a face-to-face basis, on a daily basis, like you want to be? What are we going to do for our students and those device needs? So that's something lots of districts are currently thinking about, trying to make plans on. The supply chain kind of broke down with that. Lots of places were out of Chromebooks for a while, and are trying to get more in anticipation for districts to make huge purchases moving forward. But that tech divide is a big deal. One of the other things that I don't know how many of us really thought about it was, sure, there's a device at home. There's one, but there are 3 kids who are all school age, or there are 2 kids who are in both in middle school, and they both are supposed to be online at this time. And how do you do that with one singular device in the home? How do you make sure that you schedule enough time so that everybody can get their work done and no one is missing something because they just didn't have access to the computer at the house? Another big issue that I think was exacerbated during this whole situation was the fact that some apps are only for PC, or some apps are only for Mac iOS, and some apps don't even offer support for mobile devices. And I think most recent census data says that somewhere up to more than 2/3 of American users connect to the internet via a mobile device. So if you're using tech that doesn't support mobile devices, well, how many students are you eliminating from the possibility of connecting the way they need to connect? These are all conversations and all things that as educators and as leaders, especially those who are making these decisions, we need to know this, and we need to be thinking about these things and getting that feedback from families on what worked well, what didn't work, so that we can move forward and try to bridge this huge tech gap that we have. That leads me to parents who were essential workers and don't allow their students to be on the internet when they're not home. Those students had to get paper packets, right? And closely related to that, working outside of the home because you have to, because you're an essential worker, because you're the only one who's working, the wealth gap. People lost their jobs in record numbers. Unemployment skyrocketing. All of these different situations that cause people to be without money and without income, right? So what we end up with is vulnerable students who don't have a device, don't have internet, may not have parent income because they were laid off, and once these moratoriums are up on evictions, may not have housing. What do we do as schools, and what kinds of conversations are we having? What kinds of supports are we trying to put in place with local organizations and nonprofits to support our students who are going to end up in a worse situation because of this pandemic? As much as we want to believe that students got the instruction online, reality is COVID-19 created learning gaps for lots of kids. And we have to think about what that means for us. If we didn't do end of year assessments, are we doing beginning of year assessments? How are we going to find out where students are and where they need to be? How are we going to make sure that we support especially our most vulnerable population so that they don't continue to fall behind because of issues that have nothing to do with their decisions? Those are all things that we have to think about when we talk about access and we talk about equity. I think about my child. My child has a dedicated device. He had two parents at home who, when one was in a meeting, the other one could have been helping him with work. When the other one was in a meeting, we took turns. We tried to make sure that we were both providing the support that he needed. But everyone doesn't have that kind of situation, and we want to make sure that we are providing enough for all of our students to be able to move to the next level and not be so severely impacted by COVID and all of the things that were already wrong in this country, all of the things that were already wrong with the public education system or with school in general. So those are questions and ideas and things that I want all of us to be thinking about and asking each other, where are we going from here? How are we going to make this different? How are we going to do what we can to support students who are struggling and who will continue to struggle until we create together a path forward for them? I want to thank you for watching today. Please don't forget to subscribe, share the video with others who may need to hear this information. If you ever have questions, please feel free to comment in the box and I will do my very best to find the information that you need. Thank you.